Hi Katribo and friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Raha Doms Datahan Nagarin of the Skaya Indigenous community with its ancestral domain similarly situated in Bohol Islands of the Republic of the Philippines. Currently, the Skaya tribe is scattered in almost all parts of Mindanao that gives birth to the Skaya Manubut tribal community, particularly in the northeastern part of the island of Mindanao. In the interest of clarity, the term indigenous as used in the Philippines refers to ethno-linguistic groups or subgroups that maintain it of partial isolation or independence throughout the colonial era. Under Republic Act 8371 of 1997, an act to recognize, protect, and promote the rights of indigenous cultural communities or indigenous peoples, creating a National Commission of Indigenous Peoples, establishing implementing mechanism, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes. The indigenous communities in the Philippines somehow enjoy autonomy but not total autonomy and self-determination. This Republic Act 8371, known as the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or in brevity IPRA law, was enacted in 1997. It has been praised for its support for the cultural integrity of indigenous peoples, the right to their lands, and the right to self-directed development of this land. Republic Act 8371, otherwise known as IPRA law, is a law that is a realization as being mandated under the Philippine Constitution as enshrined in Article 14, Section 17, that provides that the state shall recognize, respect, and protect the rights of indigenous cultural communities to preserve and develop their cultures, traditions, and institutions. It's been more than 4 centuries in the Philippines, and not only the Philippines, that the indigenous peoples or the indigenous cultural communities are fighting for their land. And that also reflects the fight of the indigenous peoples in the Asia Pacific region. And they are asking for their ancestral domain to be returned to their control. What is an ancestral domain? An ancestral domain or ancestral lands refers to the lands, territories, and resources of indigenous peoples, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. The other term of the indigenous peoples in the Philippines are Lumads. The Lumads are fighting for a lot of things. The Lumad have organized protest actions against mining, extrajudicial killings, and the militarization of their communities, and have led Manilakbayan people's caravans from Mindanao to Manila, where they have built unity with Moro and peasant communities and other oppressed sectors in Mindanao that have been victims of these abuses. One of the primordial highlights of Republic Act 8371, otherwise known as the IPRA law of 8371, is the birth of the National Commission of Indigenous People. The role of the National Commission of Indigenous People, or known as NCIP, is it is the primary government agency that formulates and implements policies, plans, and programs for the recognition, promotion, and protection of the rights and well-being of indigenous peoples with due regard to their ancestral domains and lands, self-governance and empowerment, social justice, and human rights. One might ask, who are the original peoples? Among the indigenous peoples are those of the Americas, for example, the Lakota in the United States of America, the Mayas in Guatemala, or the Aymaras in Bolivia, the Inuit and Algonquians of the circumpolar region, the Sami of northern Europe, the Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders of Australia, and the Maori of New Zealand. Many people ask me, what is the right to ancestral domain? As peoples, the ancestral domains of the indigenous cultural communities or the indigenous peoples is the foundation of the right to self-determination. As such, the indigenous cultural communities or the indigenous peoples have the right to decide to their own priorities for development, affecting their lives, beliefs, institutions, spiritual well-being, and the lands they own, occupy, and use. One friend asked me, what makes someone indigenous? Indigenous peoples, also known in some regions as First Peoples, First Nations, Aboriginal peoples or Native peoples, or autochthonous people, are ethnic groups who are the original or earliest known inhabitants of an area, in contrast to groups that have settled, occupied, or colonized the area more recently. A while ago, I made mention of Lumads being killed, or the Lumad killings. The Lumads are people from various ethnic groups in Mindanao Island. Manila-based activist groups claim that the Lumad territory were being militarized by the armed forces of the Philippines, and that community leaders and teachers were being detained by the military on suspicion of being rebels. But in reality, we can see the New People's Army of the Communist Party who harassed the Lumad in all their lives. The Lumad culture is rich and diverse, with a wide range of languages, chants, rituals, dances, and other traditions. Over the past 2 decades, schools of living tradition, or we call it SLTs, have been established by both Lumad and more indigenous cultures throughout the Philippines. In the Philippine setting, there are 134 ethnic groups, the majority of which are indigenous, though much of the overall Philippine population is constituted by only 8 to 10 lowland ethnic groups. Tribuan friends, earlier I made mention of my tribe, the Iskaya cultural community or the Iskaya people. The Iskaya people have its own ancestral domain in the Bohol Islands province of the Philippines. But I also mentioned that my tribe scattered in most part of Mindanao, particularly in the northeastern part and the Soxargen region of the island of Mindanao. According to study, the Sky tribe is the only remaining tribe with its own system of writing. For instance, the Manobo tribe can speak Manobo, but they don't have their own system of writing. In this segment, Katiban friends, I would like to share to you some words, Iskaya words, and I will translate it in English and Visayan language. Visayan language are spoken language in most parts of the Visayan Islands or the central part of the Philippines and in the southern part of the Philippines, which is Mindanao. So allow me to share to you the Skaya 12 months of the year. So we will start with Imio, which means in English January, in Visayan language Enero. Now let's go to Hebion, in English February, in Visayan language Pebrero. Now let's go to Maso, in English March, in Visayan language Marso. Next we have Caben, in English April, in Visayan language Abril. Now let's go to Mao or Mao, in English May, in Visayan language Mayo. Now let's proceed to Hobby, in English that's June, in Visayan language that's Honyo. We have Hobion, in English that's July, in Visayan language that's Hulyo. Now we have Tatoo, which means in English August, in Visayan language that's August. Now we have Septibe, in English that's September, and in Visayan language that's September. We have also October, which means in English October, in Visayan language that's October. We also do have Nobi, in Skaya language that's in English that's November, and Visayan language that's Nobyembre. And the last month of the year is Debe, which means in English December, in Visayan language that's Diciembre. Now let's go to the days of the week in Skaya, or week means Sima in Skaya. Let's start with Liongo, in English that's Sunday, in Visayan language that's Domingo. We have Leni, in English that's Monday, in Visayan language that's Lunes. Let's go to Mimati, in English that's Tuesday, in Visayan language that's Martes. Now we do have Mibo, in English that's Wednesday, in Visayan language that's Miércoles. We also have Hober, in English that's Thursday, and in Visayan language that's Jueves. We also have Bini, which means in English Friday, in Visayan language that's Viernes. And the last day of the week that's Sanobe, in English that's Saturday, and Visayan language that's Sabado. Now let's go back to the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act law, or otherwise known as IPRA law of 8371. I made mention of ancestral domains. Under the Republic Act, or the Republic Act 8371, or the IPRA law of 7371, it defines ancestral domain in this wise. Subject to Section 56 thereof, refer to all areas generally belonging to Indigenous Cultural Communities, or ICCs, or Indigenous Peoples, IPs, comprising lands, inland waters, coastal areas, and natural resources therein, held under a claim of ownership, occupied or possessed by ICCs or IPs, by themselves or through their ancestors, communally or individually, since time immemorial, continuously to the present, except when interrupted by war, force majeure, or displacement by force, deceit, stealth, or as a consequence of government projects or any other voluntary dealings entered into by government and private individuals, corporations, and which are necessary to ensure their economic, social, and cultural welfare. It shall include ancestral lands, forest, pasture, residual, agricultural, and other individually owned whether alienable or disposable or otherwise hunting grounds, burial grounds, worship areas, bodies of water, mineral and other natural resources, and lands which may no longer be exclusively occupied by ICCs or IPs, but from which they traditionally had access to for their subsistence and traditional activities, particularly the home ranges of ICCs or IPs who are still nomadic and or shifting cultivators. That is exactly the reason why yours truly, Radoms the Magarin of the indigenous peoples of the Sky Tribe, organized the Indigenous People Organic Network or IPON with its indigenous natives electronic wave system to inform, to unite, and to call all indigenous peoples inside the Philippine territory and outside to discuss among ourselves our plight, our culture, our tradition being threatened by outside forces. That is the reason why this channel is created, ladies and gentlemen, friends of, of YouTube channel. I hope and pray that we members of the indigenous peoples or the indigenous cultural communities will prosper in our endeavor for cultural and economic and political survival. I will further present to you in truth and in substance the plight of the indigenous peoples in the Philippines and around the globe, and our advocacy for environmental protection, our right to ancestral domain. That is the primordial purpose, Kativan friends, why I have this channel. The Raha Doms IPON. IPON stands for Indigenous People Organic Network, Indigenous Native Electronic Wave System. I hope that I can disseminate information, factual information, to all indigenous people in my country, all indigenous communities across the country, and promote coordination, unity, understanding, respect of our culture and tradition, and promotion of social justice, human rights, our right to education, our right to the ancestral domain, and all the rights within the indigenous community that should be owned and controlled by its own people. In closing of today's episode on this channel, I would like to thank you for listening. Please continue to subscribe and follow me on my YouTube channel. Click and share for my YouTube channel, and I hope you guys enjoy watching and listening my YouTube as well. Don't forget to click, but before that you have to make a comment first, and then you click, and then after clicking on my video, please go to the subscription button, the bell button, then bell all, my dear friends. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. God bless everyone.